We are banning 1,500 models and variants of these firearms by way of regulations.
What if the police called your wife tomorrow and asked if you might become violent someday? Not because you'd committed a crime, not because anyone had filed a complaint, not because there was evidence against you, but just because you owned something the government doesn't like.
It doesn't mix well with firearms. That's the basis.
Sounds outrageous, doesn't it? Well, that's exactly what's happening in Quebec right now. 7.5 years. That's how long Canada's licensed firearms owners will be living under a cloud of legal uncertainty. This week, Public Safety Canada quietly announced it's extending the federal gun ban amnesty yet again, this time until after the Supreme Court of Canada hears the Canadian Coalition for Firearms Rights challenge to the Liberal government's 2020 gun ban. 7.5 years after Justin Trudeau stood at a podium and criminalized hundreds of thousands of previously perfectly legal firearms by order in council.
Today, we are closing the market for military-grade assault weapons in Canada. We are banning 1,500 models and variants of these firearms by way of regulations.
The government still hasn't managed to confiscate them, and thank goodness for that. It's a rare instance where I cheer for government incompetence. It'll be 7.5 years, and Canadians are still waiting for the courts to decide whether the whole thing was even lawful in the first place. And thank goodness for Tracy Wilson, Rod Giltaca, the CCFR, and of course the thousands of gun owners who helped fund this fight. Because without them, there would be no challenge left standing between lawful firearms owners and one of the largest confiscation schemes in Canadian history. But while Ottawa waits for the Supreme Court, Quebec police are already acting as though licensed gun owners themselves are the problem. The Sûreté du Québec, or SQ, has launched a new initiative where police officers contact the spouses of licensed firearms owners to ask about possible domestic violence concerns. Now, let's be crystal clear here. Domestic violence is a serious crime, of course. If police receive a complaint, they should investigate it. If there's evidence of abuse, intervene, charge. If someone poses a genuine threat, remove those firearms. But the law already allows for all of that. In fact, Canada has layer upon layer of law designed specifically for those situations. Police can seize firearms. Judges can issue protective orders. Licenses can be suspended. Licenses can be revoked. Canada already has so-called red flag laws and even yellow flag laws allowing authorities to remove firearms before violence occurs. Those powers already exist. They already want to know your conjugal partners, if you can believe that, when you're applying for your gun license. Creepy, but those are the rules. So if those laws already exist, why are Quebec police now cold calling spouses of people who haven't been accused of anything? That's the question here nobody seems willing to answer. The SQ isn't responding to complaints. They're not investigating crimes. They're not following up on witness statements. They're not acting on evidence here. They're cold calling people simply because their spouse legally owns firearms. Think about that. It's Minority Report pre-crime policing in Canada.
The call goes something like this. An officer will ask whether the spouse has any concern or fear for their safety. If the answer is yes, the case is transferred to an investigator.
We want to remove firearms from the households where there's a potential risk.
To fight back against the federal government's constant targeting of the law-abiding firearms-owning community, please go to handsofourguns.com. To get a possession and acquisition license in Canada, you already go mandatory training, you pass background checks, you provide references, including the aforementioned conjugal partners, you disclose your criminal history, you disclose mental health concerns, and after all that, you're continuously monitored by the RCMP through ongoing eligibility screening. Not once a year, every single day. Licensed gun owners are probably the most scrutinized civilian population in Canada. And apparently that's still not enough, at least for the SQ.
We always took domestic violence very seriously as it doesn't mix well with firearms. That's the basis. And the uptick of feminicides, and it is definitely a motivation.
There's been a 150% increase in tips called in by spouses to the SQ Firearms Bureau in the past 6 months.
The police are conducting what looks suspiciously like fishing expeditions into the private lives of people who have done absolutely nothing wrong. Let's put this in a different context. Imagine if police started calling the spouses of licensed drivers. Hello, ma'am. We're just wondering if your husband might someday drive drunk. People would lose their marbles. Imagine police contacting the families of prescription pain medication users. Good day, sir. We're just checking whether your wife might misuse her medication one day. Nobody would tolerate this. But somehow, when the target is licensed firearms owners, we're expected to pretend this is completely normal and not an absolute abuse of police power. And that's, I think, a bigger issue here. It's the bigotry of it all. After years of liberal gun control, years of bans, years of freezes, years of confiscation schemes, years of background checks, years of red flag laws, we're being told that none of it is enough simply because we're gun owners. And it's not because the laws have failed. Not because gun owners have failed. It's because the objective never really was compliance. It's control.
The only people who've been impacted by this government's failed gun policies have been law-abiding hunters and sports shooters. Meanwhile, violent criminals and organized crime are benefiting from this government's bail, not jail policies.
It's scapegoating the one group of people who have done nothing but follow the laws for the actions of people who don't. The objective keeps moving. Every time gun owners comply, the government demands something more restrictions, more monitoring, more reporting, more suspicion, and more investigations apropos of absolutely nothing. The messaging to lawful firearms owners is becoming impossible to ignore. No amount of licensing will ever be enough. No amount of training will ever be enough. No amount of background checks will ever be enough. No amount of compliance will ever be enough. Because the problem isn't dangerous firearms owners. The problem, in the eyes of the activists and the government, is lawful firearms ownership itself. That's why 7.5 years after the Liberals announced their gun ban, they still won't have proven how it would improve public safety. They haven't even tried. They have zero analysis on the effect on public safety of this very expensive multi-billion-dollar gun grab. That's why they keep extending the amnesties. That's why the confiscation program keeps missing its deadlines, thank God. That's why police are now contacting spouses of people who haven't committed any crime. When red flag laws, court orders, license revocations, continuous screening, and police seizure powers are still considered insufficient, we're no longer talking about targeting dangerous individuals. We're talking about treating licensed firearms owners as inherently suspect. And in the olden days, that's what we used to call discrimination. For Rebel News, I'm Sheila Gunn Reid.